The morning sun poured gently through the lace curtains, painting soft golden patterns across the wooden floor. Emily Carter sat at the small kitchen table of her grandmother's old house, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. The house was quiet now, too quiet, she often thought. The kind of quiet that reminded you of what's missing rather than what's there, outside. The coastal wind hummed through the trees. The waves from the nearby shore whispered faintly in the distance, blending with the slow ticking of the old wall clock. It was the house she had visited every summer as a child, filled with laughter, stories, and the comforting scent of her grandmother's baking. But now it felt like a museum of memories, everything frozen in place. Waiting for someone to remember, Emily was 32, thoughtful, gentle, and endlessly curious about the world. Yet her life had grown still, like a painting that had once been full of color but had begun to fade with time. She worked as a librarian in town, surrounded by stories that spoke of adventure, love, and discovery. But her own life had become quiet, too predictable sometimes. When the world outside felt too heavy, she would read old letters she found tucked between the pages of donated books. Strangers' words written decades ago fascinated her the way they spoke about dreams, fears, and small joys. It reminded her of something she couldn't quite name. A longing, perhaps, or a story of her own that hadn't yet begun that morning. Emily looked around the living room and noticed how sunlight caught the dust motes in the air, turning them into tiny stars. On the wall hung an old photograph of her grandmother, smiling beside a tall, dark-haired man she didn't recognize. She had seen the photo before, of course, but something about it drew her attention differently today. The man's eyes held a warmth that seemed to reach across the years. And her grandmother's expression, soft yet wistful, made Emily's chest tighten. "Who were you?" she whispered to the picture. She stood, tea forgotten, and walked to the attic stairs. She hadn't been up there since her grandmother passed. The door creaked open as she pulled the cord to switch on the single dangling light bulb. The attic smelled of cedar and thyme. Boxes were stacked neatly, labeled in her grandmother's careful handwriting. Winter clothes, family photos, letters, keep safe. That last one caught her eye. Kneeling down, she brushed away the dust and opened the box. Inside lay bundles of letters tied with faded ribbons, postcards from places her grandmother had never spoken of. And a small envelope that stood out to it wasn't labeled, just sealed and slightly yellowed with age. On the front, written in delicate cursive, were the words, "**** for when the time feels right." ****, Emily's breath caught. The handwriting was her grandmother's, but the message felt almost alive, as if it had been waiting for someone, maybe her, to find it. She hesitated, fingers tracing the edge of the paper. She didn't know why her heart raced, but it did. Something about the letter seemed to hum quietly in the air, carrying a secret too tender to be ignored. She opened it. The letter began softly, almost like a whisper from another time. "Greater than if you are reading this. It means the silence has finally reached you, the same silence I once felt when I realized I had kept too many dreams inside." Emily read on, her throat tightening with every line. The letter spoke of choices made, of a love that had brought both joy and heartbreak, and of a moment when her grandmother had chosen duty over desire. Yet it wasn't just a love letter. It was a reflection, a confession, a story written by someone who understood what it meant to hide a piece of their heart. When she finished reading, Emily sat back, the attic light flickering above her. The world felt different now, wider, somehow. Her grandmother, the woman who had always seemed so content and composed, had lived with a quiet ache beneath her calm smile. Emily thought of her own life, how often she smiled to reassure others, how she filled her days with books and routines, telling herself she was fine. But deep down, she knew she carried her own unspoken wishes. Perhaps that was why she felt drawn to this letter, as if it were speaking not just from the past, but directly to her present. She placed the letter back in its envelope and noticed something else beneath it, a smaller folded note, tucked carefully between the old ribbons. It looked newer, the paper less aged, as though it had been added later. She turned it over. There was no name, just a short message written in blue ink. Greater than if you ever find this, meet me by the old lighthouse at sunset. The words sent a shiver down her spine. There was no date, no signature, just that quiet invitation like an unfinished story waiting to be told. Emily looked toward the small attic window where sunlight filtered through, illuminating the note in her hand. For the first time in a long while, her heart stirred with something other than loneliness. It was curiosity, yes, but also something deeper. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, this discovery would lead her somewhere unexpected. Somewhere she was meant to go, and as she stood there, the ocean breeze drifted faintly through the cracks of the old house, carrying a promise only the wind seemed to understand. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The old letter rested on her bedside table, and each time she closed her eyes, she saw the elegant handwriting and those simple words asterisk, meet me by the old lighthouse at sunset, asterisk outside. Rain tapped gently against the windows, and the rhythmic sound reminded her of nights spent here as a child, listening to her grandmother hum soft melodies while the storm raged outside. Back then, she thought her grandmother was unshakable, someone who had known every answer life could ask. But now, reading the letter, Emily realized how little she had truly known. The next morning, she brewed a fresh cup of coffee and sat by the window, looking out at the ocean beyond the hills. She thought about the letter, again about love, about choices, and about the quiet ache hidden behind her grandmother's smile. Her thoughts drifted, pulling her back into her own past, to a time when she, too, had felt something tender and fleeting. It had been almost 8 years ago, during her first job at the small-town library. Back then, Emily had been new to the quiet rhythms of the seaside town, young, hopeful, still learning how to build a life on her own. The library was her refuge. Filled with the scent of old paper and the gentle hum of pages turning, that's where she met Daniel Miller. He was a local history teacher who came by every Thursday afternoon, looking for books about maritime legends and local folklore. He always had a kind smile, and there was something about the way he spoke, thoughtful, patient, that made people feel safe in his presence. Emily used to help him find old journals and records, sometimes lingering just a little longer than needed as they talked about the past. Their connection wasn't dramatic or rushed. It grew in quiet moments, over shared laughter when they both reached for the same book, over gentle conversations about the beauty of forgotten stories. Sometimes he'd bring her coffee from the cafe across the street, saying it was a librarian's fuel. She'd smile, pretending not to notice that he always remembered exactly how she liked it: 2 sugars, no cream. One autumn afternoon, as golden leaves drifted past the library windows, they sat together near the back shelves, reading an old sailor's diary from the 1940s. The pages spoke of longing and homecoming, of storms and waiting hearts. Daniel looked up from the book and said quietly, "It's strange, isn't it? How some people spend their whole lives waiting for something they can't even name." Emily nodded, the words lingering in her chest long after he'd gone. Over time, their friendship became a soft constant. They'd walk by the harbor on slow evenings, talking about books, dreams, and what it meant to belong somewhere. Yet beneath the easy rhythm of their friendship, there was always something unspoken, a quiet warmth that neither dared to name. Then, one winter, Daniel received an offer to teach at a university across the country. He told her about it one evening, his voice steady, but his eyes uncertain. Emily congratulated him, smiling through the ache in her chest. They promised to stay in touch, to call, to write, but time has a way of softening promises into memories. His last visit to the library felt like the end of a chapter. He brought her a small seashell, smooth and white, saying it reminded him of the sound of the sea inside her favorite books. She still kept it tucked safely in her journal when he left. Emily stood at the doorway, watching him disappear into the snowy dusk. She didn't cry. She simply whispered a quiet goodbye that only the wind could hear. Years passed. Seasons changed. Emily built a quiet life around routine and solitude, the kind that felt peaceful on the surface but hollow underneath. She often wondered if her grandmother had once felt the same, holding on to memories that never fully faded. Two words that were never said aloud down now. Sitting in that same house, reading her grandmother's letters, she realized how connected their stories were. Both had known love that never shouted, only whispered. Both had chosen silence over chaos, patience over pursuit. Her grandmother's letter had ended with a simple truth. Greater than. Curiosity is not just about seeking answers, it's about finding yourself in the questions you dare to ask. Emily turned the words over in her mind as she drove toward the lighthouse later that day. The sky was pale and stretched wide above the sea, and gulls traced circles in the cool wind. The lighthouse stood tall at the edge of the cliffs, weathered but steadfast. Its white paint faded by decades of sun and salt. She parked near the old path and stepped out, her shoes crunching over the gravel. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, shimmering with quiet strength. For a moment, she closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of the sea. Feeling something old and tender awaken inside her, a mix of longing, nostalgia, and peace. She thought of her grandmother and Daniel, of love that didn't always find a way but always left its mark. She thought about all the letters, all the words that people write when their hearts are too full to speak. The lighthouse door creaked softly in the wind, as if welcoming her. Emily took a step closer, unaware that her search for answers was only just beginning, into that curiosity, once again, was leading her somewhere she could not yet name. The lighthouse stood like a sentinel against the horizon, its white walls catching the soft gold of late afternoon. Emily's heart quickened not with fear, but with a quiet, unspoken anticipation. The note in her hand had led her here, yet she felt unprepared for what or who she might find as she stepped onto the weathered path. A figure appeared near the top of the cliffs. For a moment, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. The man paused, looking out at the sea as if waiting for someone. The wind tousled his hair, and he turned slowly, catching sight of her. Emily's breath hitched. It was Thomas. "Okay, man." She had only known from her grandmother's stories, or at least from what she had glimpsed in the letters. He was older than she had imagined, with gentle lines etched by time. Yet there was a softness in his eyes that made him immediately recognizable. Emily. His voice was careful, cautious, like someone testing a bridge before crossing it. She nodded, unable to speak at first. The air between them carried decades of unspoken moments. The lighthouse, the waves, the fading sunlight, all felt suspended in a perfect, fragile pause. "Your grandmother. She spoke of you," Thomas said, finally breaking the quiet. "Not often, but she mentioned someone who reminded her of hope." Emily smiled faintly. "Hope can be hard to see sometimes." He nodded, shifting slightly closer, but keeping a respectful distance. "Yes, especially when it comes to things we don't fully understand until much later." They walked along the cliff edge together, the gravel crunching beneath their feet. Emily felt her curiosity mingling with something deeper, quiet recognition, a thread connecting her to the past. She thought of her grandmother's stories of letters hidden for years, and of all the small gestures that had been left behind like breadcrumbs through time. Thomas pointed toward the lighthouse. "I used to come here every year." Waiting, not really knowing for what, but knowing it mattered. Emily glanced at him. "Waiting can be hard." "It can. But sometimes waiting isn't about the other person. It's about understanding yourself." His voice carried warmth without expectation, a tenderness that seemed to wrap around her like the wind off the cliffs. They reached a bench carved from driftwood, worn smooth by decades of ocean weather. Both sat, allowing the silence to stretch comfortably between them. Emily watched the waves break rhythmically against the rocks below. There was something humbling about the sit, reminded her of all the ways life moves forward quietly, even when hearts linger. Did James ever return?" she asked softly. Thomas exhaled slowly. "No, but in a way he did. Through her letters, through the way she remembered him, she kept him alive in stories, in hope, in quiet gestures." Emily felt a lump in her throat. "It's strange," she said after a pause. "Reading her letters. I felt like I was discovering a side of her I never knew existed. And at the same time, I felt like I was discovering something about myself. Thomas's eyes softened. That's the gift of connection, Emily. Sometimes it comes long after the moment you wish it had. Sometimes it waits for the right person to notice. She looked out at the horizon. The waves reflected the dying light, shimmering like scattered gold. I think I understand now. Curiosity isn't just about answers. It's about seeing the world and people more clearly than before. He nodded. Exactly. And sometimes curiosity leads you to unexpected discoveries about others and about yourself. They didn't need to say more. Words weren't necessary here. Their shared silence, the rhythm of the ocean, the soft rustle of the wind, it all spoke for them. Emily thought of her grandmother, of Daniel, and of the small but meaningful choices that had shaped their lives for the first time in a long while. She felt an unexpected peace. She realized that the past, no matter how hidden or distant, didn't have to define her future. It could guide her. It could teach her. It could remind her that connection, human, heartfelt, and patient, was always possible. Even after years of waiting or wandering, Thomas shifted slightly and handed her a small wooden box. Inside, Emily found the seashell necklace her grandmother had left behind, the one Thomas had described. There was a letter as well, written not for closure, but for understanding. Greater than curiosity opens doors, and love quiet, steadfast. Patient love keeps them open. Emily smiled, letting the words settle. The lighthouse, the sea, and the wind had shared their quiet story. And now, through those stories, she understood that life's gentle. Discoveries often come in ways that feel magical only in hindsight. She looked at Thomas once more. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" he asked, though his eyes already said he knew. "For reminding me that the past is never truly gone, that it can guide us even in ways we don't expect." He smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. Some stories are meant to be discovered slowly, and sometimes it takes someone curious enough to see them. Emily took a deep breath, watching the waves shimmer beneath the golden sunset. She didn't know what the future held, but she felt ready to face it with curiosity, patience, and the quiet understanding that human connection, in all its forms, is a treasure worth following. And as they sat there, sharing the silence, Emily realized that some discoveries aren't about finding someone new. They're about seeing what's already there and feeling it more deeply than ever before. The lighthouse stood quiet as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon. Emily traced the edge of the wooden bench with her fingers, the small seashell necklace warm in her palm. The air smelled of salt and cedar, and for a moment it felt as if time itself had slowed. Allowing the past and present to meet gently, Thomas sat beside her, not speaking, giving space for her thoughts to settle. Emily thought about everything she had discovered, the letters, the stories, and the hidden longings of a woman she had always admired. She realized that curiosity had brought her here, yes, but understanding had given her peace. Finally, Emily spoke. I understand why my grandmother kept these letters. She wanted someone to see what love can be, even when life doesn't give you everything you hope for. Even when timing separates people, love leaves a mark." Thomas nodded, his eyes reflecting the last glimmers of sunset. "She did. And she also wanted you to know that life doesn't end with missed chances. It continues through those who are willing to notice, to remember, and to carry the lessons forward." Emily felt a lump in her throat. The words struck a chord deep within her, not sadness, but a tender awareness. She realized that love isn't always about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and enduring. Sometimes it's found in understanding someone's heart across decades. In noticing the gentle patterns left behind, in listening with full attention, Thomas leaned back slightly, his gaze on the horizon. "You know," he said softly, "I think your grandmother would have been proud of you. She would have smiled knowing that curiosity led you to discover what really matters, not just the story, but the meaning behind it." Connolly closed her eyes. letting the wind brush her cheeks. She remembered her own life, her own unspoken longings, and how easily she had let routine and fear hold her back. But now she saw that curiosity, patience, care could guide her toward moments of clarity. Care's connections that didn't demand perfection, but simply presence. She hesitated, then smiled. I think I've been afraid to notice the quiet beauty in life. To see the moments, the small gestures, and the people who quietly shape our hearts. Thomas turned toward her, his expression calm and kind. That's the hardest part, isn't it? To see what's been there all along and to finally let it touch you. Emily's thoughts drifted to Daniel, to the soft warmth of friendship that had never fully left her heart. She realized that love doesn't always need to be dramatic or perfect. It can live in memories, in lessons, in the quiet understanding of those who came before us. Her grandmother had loved, lost, and preserved the meaning of her feelings through letters and small treasures. And now Emily could honor that legacy by embracing her own heart fully, without fear. She turned to Thomas one last time. Thank you for showing me that some discoveries aren't about finding something new. They're about seeing what's already there and appreciating it fully. Thomas smiled, a gentle curve of understanding. You found it. And that's the gift of curiosity and attention. For a while, they sat together in silence. The lighthouse towered behind them, steady and unchanging, while the sea reflected the first hints of evening stars. Emily felt a sense of completion, not of endings, but of understanding. She had learned that hearts are patient, that love can exist in many forms, and that sometimes the act of noticing and honoring a story is the truest expression of care. Finally, Emily stood, brushing sand from her shoes. She looked at Thomas, a quiet farewell in her eyes, but also gratitude. I should go, she said softly, but I won't forget this moment, or what it's taught me. Thomas nodded. Nor will I sometimes. The right people come into your life just to remind you of the things that truly matter. She walked down the path toward her car, the wind carrying her hair gently behind her. Every step felt lighter than before, as though the weight of unanswered questions had been lifted. She glanced back at the lighthouse one last time. The light, though fading, seemed to shine more brightly now, less as a warning, more as a quiet guide. Driving home, Emily felt a warmth she hadn't realized she'd been missing. It wasn't romantic longing or dramatic passion, it was the satisfaction of understanding, connecting, and of witnessing the enduring power of human care. She understood her grandmother, she understood Daniel, and she understood herself a little better. Sitting by the window that night, she held the seashell necklace close. She thought about curiosity, about noticing, about the lessons woven through generations. And as she let the gentle rhythm of the waves fill her thoughts, she smiled. Some stories, she realized, don't end, they continue quietly. In hearts willing to listen and see. And in that quiet moment, Emily felt a truth she would carry forever, that the heart grows not only from love received, but from love understood, remembered, and shared.